Post Super Bowl 59 mock draft. As we all know, the Philadelphia Eagles took care of business in Super Bowl 59 as they manhandled the Chiefs with a score of 40-22. Even an 18-point victory for the Birds does not describe how that game was played, as there was a point in the game where they were up 40-6, and they absolutely manhandled the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think one of the biggest lessons from that game is to realize just how important trenches are, and that the trenches win championships. And when you apply that to today's mock draft, I think it really starts with the number 1 overall pick, because there was a quote out of the Tennessee Titans that basically said, "We are not going to pass on a generational prospect." And to me, what that meant was that we are not going to pass on Abdul Carter in place of Cam Ward, who is a better prospect at his position than Cam Ward is his. Now, just because we said that trenches matter and that trenches are, of course, going to dictate most games, does not mean every single team can go with a trench player and to really try and beef up the trenches. And I think that's especially true in the case of the Cleveland Browns, who I do believe are in a scenario where certainly not ideal, as the Deshaun situation has kind of set them back a couple of years. And when you look at where the Browns are, I think they are in a position where they have to draft a quarterback, because there's not a lot to look forward to with this organization at the moment. And I do think Cam Ward is the best quarterback in this class, and we are going to go with Cam Ward with the number 2 overall pick. And in a similar situation at number 3 overall is the New York Giants. They are definitely in a scenario where both Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll are on the hot seat as the general manager and head coaching duo, and I don't think anybody would have been surprised if either or even both were fired after the season they just had. It was a very bad season all around, and even when they were supposed to, tank is very subjective, because you're not going to be able to go up to a grown man and say, "Hey, Drew Lock, go out and throw 3 interceptions and lose us this game." That's not how tanking works. You're not going to actually be able to say that to somebody. But even when I thought they were actively trying to lose games, they beat the Colts. They put up 40 plus points in that game. Malik Neighbors looked great in that game. But the point is that lost them the number 1 overall pick and potentially Cam Ward. But where we are going with this pick is quarterback Shedeur Sanders from Colorado, and I think a very telling quote, or a very telling tweet that I saw earlier in the draft process, was from Brett Coleman, who said Shedeur worked out at the Shrine Bowl and met with every team selecting in the top 3, and after those meetings did not practice again. So I think that is pretty telling as to where the NFL views him, and I would be pretty surprised if he is not a top 3 selection at this point. Now, with the New England Patriots on the clock, they could go a variety of places here. They have a lot of holes on the roster. They could go with Tetairoa McMillan. They could go with Travis Hunter and use him as a two-way player. But when you do a mock draft post Super Bowl, obviously without seeing what teams have done in free agency, I think there needs to be a little bit of projection in terms of what you think teams are going to do in free agency, in terms of what they're going to do to try and improve the roster before draft night. And I think the Patriots are going to look at the pro market for a receiver, whether that's T. Higgins, whether that's Stephon Diggs, maybe even Chris Godwin, maybe even 2 out of the 3 players out of those receivers, and do everything they can to help out Drake May and to not set him up for failure entering year 2. And that also applies to the offensive line, as I think there's a very real scenario where they can bring in one offseason, T. Higgins, Stephon Diggs for a 1-year rental, as he will be 32 in November, and then also be able to bring in either Cam Robinson or Ronnie Stanley, or both. And when you can improve all of those pieces along the offensive line, you can draft Will Campbell and play him at guard in the absolute worst case, and not have an offensive line that consists of guys like Vidarian Lowe and Layden Robinson, who were not good for the Patriots in 2024. So the Patriots, I think, will go with Will Campbell. That is a pretty popular selection for a reason, and it's a pick that I like quite a bit. Now, with the Jags here, I would love to be able to address the interior offensive line and to be able to give them a really good player that can play there for the next 4 or 5 years. And Trevor Lawrence is now 24 years old, going on 20, or he's 25 rather, going on 26. And I'd like to be able to give him some protection until hopefully he's around the age 30 mark. But the talent doesn't align for the 5th overall pick for the Jags in this scenario. So to go back to trenches win everything, and trenches can get you further than skill position players if you are that beefy along each side of the line, we are going to go with Mason Graham. And Mason Graham is a really, really good prospect, and in terms of setting a player up for success and having a player be able to thrive, I think this would be a borderline perfect situation for him. You would be in a situation with Josh Hines-Allen and Travon Walker, who I do believe is a little underrated. I think people, because the Jags aren't that popular of a team and that disgust of a team nationally, I think there's this little bit of a belief that Travon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson is borderline Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson, and it's not even close to that. It wouldn't surprise me if Travon Walker makes a Pro Bowl or even 2 in his career and finishes his career with 50 or 60 sacks, which is nowhere close to the player that Jalen Reagor was for the Eagles. So Travon Walker, very good player, very misrepresented player as to how good he is, but when you would have a defensive line of Walker, Graham, and Josh Hines-Allen, that is taking the right steps as an organization, and that is doing the right things in order to have a chance to compete in late December and early January. And I like the idea of Mason Graham along that defensive line. Now, with the Las Vegas Raiders up, there's a lot of directions they could go. Quarterback, I don't think is one of them, despite it being a big need. But when you look at the Titans, the Raiders, the Steelers are also in this as well. I would like to think that they will go with a veteran quarterback for now for a bridge this offseason, and I also think there's a scenario where the draft plays out like it did last year for the Raiders, where they are the last one standing in a game of musical chairs. And as we know, that didn't work out well for the Raiders, at least quarterback-wise. They drafted Brock Bowers, who had the best rookie tight end season of all time, but they still need a quarterback. Unfortunately, the value doesn't align here. I'm not going to force Jackson Dart at number 6 overall when a player like Tetairoa McMillan is available from Arizona. And if you can have weapons of Tetairoa McMillan, T-Mac, and Brock Bowers, and convince that plan to a guy like Sam Darnold or maybe even Aaron Rodgers or maybe even Russell Wilson for a year, not that they would still be free agents by the time the draft would roll around, but if you can try and lay that plan out for them that, hey, we can draft a Tetairoa McMillan or a Luther Burden or even draft Ashton Jeanty if Tetairoa McMillan is not available at number 6 overall, that is a very attractive option for a free agent. Now, with the Jets on the clock here, this is a bit of a tricky pick because, again, I'm not going to force Jackson Dart at number 7 overall, despite the news coming out that they are moving on from Aaron Rodgers. And the Jets are going to be in a very tricky situation this offseason. Now, what I hope new general manager Darren Muji does not do is, like we said, force Jackson Dart at 7. And I don't think that would happen in his first year as the GM. That is how, for people that love the quote, the Jets are the Jets, that is how you stay the New York Jets. I love the culture that I think Aaron Glenn is going to build, and what Aaron Glenn saw over the past couple of years, and we'll get to this more in a minute with another former Lions coordinator and his team, is they saw how the draft processes went under general manager Brad Holmes and, of course, Dan Campbell. And the way that those drafts went was, hey, let's just take good players and figure out everything later. Now, conveniently for the Lions, those good players aligned with team needs, and where that factors into where the Jets are who they are selecting at pick 7, to me, is Travis Hunter. DJ Reed is a free agent this offseason. Yes, you can make a case that another defensive lineman would be nice for the Jets, but the value doesn't align the way Travis Hunter does. I think Travis Hunter is the second best player in this class behind only Abdul Carter, and if you can have a corner like Travis Hunter to pair with Sauce Gardner, who had a bit of a down year in 2024, I think that will be a good duo for the next 3 or 4 years. I like Travis Hunter, and that would instantly become one of the best corner duos, if not definitively the best corner duo in the NFL. So, pretty simple. Darren Muji, don't overthink the player if he's there, if Travis Hunter's there, and move on with the pick. You're getting a great football player that you can also have maybe 30, 35 receptions a year, in addition to being a Pro Bowl caliber corner, probably as early as 2026. Now, with the Panthers on the clock, this is going to be a situation where we basically take the best player, or take the best defensive player available, and move on. The 2024 Panthers were not dealt a great hand of cards in terms of injuries. They had Derek Brown go down. They had just a myriad of problems all over the roster. But the big problem with the 2024 Panthers defense was not having enough talent. Now, Will Johnson does have some injury concerns, but the reason that I think the Panthers would be hesitant on selecting Will Johnson is looking at the lack of availability consistently from J.C. Horn over the first few years of his career. And if Will Johnson can stay healthy, he's a really, really good corner prospect. But I also think Mike Green from Marshall is a tremendous prospect, and I like Mike Green a lot, and that would be upgrading the Panthers' defensive line, which, as we saw in Super Bowl 59 with the Eagles, you can never have enough pass rush, you can never have enough secondary. If you would like the Panthers to take Will Johnson there, maybe even James Pierce, maybe even another player, I think it would be a little rich for Shamar Stewart, but if you like any of the other defensive players, I'm not going to push back with that pick. But I like Mike Green a tremendous amount. I watched him up close at the Senior Bowl. He is a very good prospect, and he would upgrade the Panthers' pass rush in a big way. Now, with the Saints here, they're in a unique situation. They can go a lot of different places with this pick. But one decision that I think makes a lot of sense for both sides here is, the Cowboys are going to, they need to have a better year than they did this year. I know Rico Dowdle had a good end to last year, but I think there is a real scenario where the Cowboys want to trade up into the top 10, mainly in front of the Bears, so that they can ensure that they can draft Ashton Jeanty. I know everybody gets sick of this pick, but there's a reason it makes a tremendous amount of sense for both sides. Ashton Jeanty is a very good running back prospect. He would be a star in Dallas in a similar way that a young Ezekiel Elliott was back in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. And I know a lot of people make the jokes about Zeke now, especially because he is an older back. But for anyone who may not remember Zeke's prime, he was a problem. And I think back to the Steelers game in his rookie season where he called game, and that left a lot of Steelers fans with their jaws dropped when Zeke called game back in 2016. He was a very fun player. Jerry absolutely loved Zeke, and there was a reason that he was still playing for the Cowboys in 2024. He was a great player. Ashton Jeanty is a very great prospect, and it's simple. He's a good player. Bring him in. Don't overthink it, and you'd probably have to draft in front of the Bears, who I think would be very interested in Ashton Jeanty because we go back to the Lions selecting Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, and obviously the Lions' infrastructure was there with the offensive line, whether it was Taylor Decker, whether it was Frank Ragnow, whether it was Penei Sewell. But Ben Johnson knows how much a good running back can do for your team, and so do the Philadelphia Eagles, by the way, who, of course, just won a Super Bowl with Saquon Barkley, having the most rushing yards out of any season ever when you factor in the regular and postseason. So I think Ashton Jeanty to the Bears is a pretty good pairing right now, especially when you factor in Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson and Rome Odunze, and the offensive line certainly struggled at times last year, but there were a couple of solid spots up front with the Bears offensive line that Ashton Jeanty would be able to run behind. Now, with the Bears on the clock, I would like them to go interior offensive line, but I don't think a guy like Tyler Booker makes sense for them here. I would not be opposed to Armand Mambu, but one player that I like the pairing of with the Chicago Bears is James Pierce. The Bears had a pretty down year in 2024 from a pass rushing perspective, even from Montez Sweat, who was, of course, paid a lot of money to be that guy, but it was down all across the board. I know Gervon Dexter showed flashes in year 2, which was really good to see, and I was hoping for more of a step from DeMarcus Walker. Unfortunately, we did not get that step from DeMarcus Walker in 2024, at least not to the level that I was hoping for, and I thought he had a bit of a regression year, but Montez Sweat led this team in sacks with 5.5, and if you're going to eventually get back to, eventually be a 11 or 12 win team in the Bears case and compete in the NFC North, you're going to have to be able to get after guys like Jared Goff, JJ McCarthy, and Jordan Love. And the big thing with the Lions, of course, is their offensive line. You are not going to beat Penei Sewell 7 times in a game one-on-one with DeMarcus Walker consistently. And you can't bank on that. You can't bank on Penei Sewell in Week 18 with a playoff spot on the line, him having an all-time bad game where he gives up 7 or 8 pressures and a guy like DeMarcus Walker just beats him repeatedly. So with the thought process here of that, draft a good football player, improve the trenches, and have a good edge rushing duo of Montez Sweat and James Pierce. Now, with the 49ers on the clock, they are going to be entering a situation from a franchise perspective where they can no longer exploit the quarterback being as cheap as he was over the past couple of years. And they're going to have to draft really well. And what I think the 49ers best case scenario is to draft good football players that have a high floor and know you're getting a good football player. A guy like that to me, although he's not going to go here, but a guy like that to me is Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. But another player that I think represents that is Armand Mambu from Missouri. The 49ers could use some interior help, not at right guard, of course, because Dominic Pooney had a tremendous rookie season. Shout out to John Lynch for that draft pick last year, by the way. But Trent Williams will be 37. He's obviously not going to play forever. It seems every offseason that we have a Trent Williams contract situation, and like we said, he's 37. It's kind of an anomaly that he's still playing at this age, and if you can draft Armand Mambu to play guard or tackle, maybe kick out in year 2 if you need him to, that is the definition of we're going to swing the bat here, we're going to hit a double. That could not necessarily develop into a home run, but you get the point of we're going to hit a double here, we're not going to overthink it, and we're going to take a good football player and improve the interior offensive line. Now, with the New Orleans Saints up here, this was a pick that I struggle with because I don't think there's an obvious selection for them. When you look at the players that they passed on to acquire an extra third-round pick here, to acquire another top 100 pick, I don't think any of them you can definitively say, like, hey, we absolutely need Ashton Jeanty for the Saints, or James Pierce, or Armand Mambu. Yes, they would be nice, but I think you can argue that whatever player they draft here, and the player they draft at 76 with the pick that they would get from the Cowboys, would be more beneficial than just drafting any of these 3 players right here. So with that thought process in mind, where we are going with the New Orleans Saints is the receiver position, and we are going to draft Missouri's Luther Burden. And why I think this makes a lot of sense for the Saints is, unfortunately, we don't know about Chris Olave's future at this point. We wish him the best and hope everything works out, but even if he comes back to being a 1,000-yard player the way that he was in the first 2 years of his career, Chris Olave needs some help, and it's never bad to have a second receiving option. I wouldn't be opposed to another offensive lineman here for the Saints, but I really do like the idea of Luther Burden going there and then having the receiving duo of a healthy Chris Olave and a healthy Luther Burden, who, based on 2023 tape, can easily be a top 5 or 7 player in this class. So hopefully we can get Luther Burden back to that level. He had a bit of a down 2024, but if he walks into a situation in year 1, Chris Olave kind of as a mentor, kind of as a wide receiver 1, and Luther Burden can play that wide receiver 2 role and not be the focal point of an opposing defense every single week, I think that'd be a really good pickup for the New Orleans Saints. Now, with the Dolphins on the clock, I really hope that Chris Grier watched that game last night and woke up, looked in the mirror, and said, what we have in the trenches is never going to cut it based on where we are. The uncertainty around Teron Armstead every year is pretty notable. So I think when you factor that in, you have to look at the offensive lineman available, and take your choosing. If you prefer Josh Connerly, if you prefer Kelvin Banks, whoever, I'm going to go with Josh Simmons here. If you want to go with Kelvin Banks, be my guest, but I like Josh Simmons a lot. I know he tore his ACL last year, but he was playing extremely good football prior to that, and if he doesn't tear his ACL last year, I think he'd be a pretty secure top 10 pick. We've been falling to pick 13 here, but I really, really do like Josh Simmons, and he would be a guy to upgrade the Dolphins' offensive line, which, as we know, is a tremendous need for them. Now, with the Indianapolis Colts up at pick 14, to me, there's 2 options here, both of which would upgrade your team significantly. The options to me are Tyler Warren and Will Johnson. And the reason that I'm going to go with Tyler Warren over Will Johnson is because when you look at Chris Ballard, and then when you look at Shane Steichen, and you look how the 2024 Colts season played out, I think they are both on the hot seat entering 2025. And the reality is, when you factor all of these things in, you can very much make the case that Will Johnson, a healthy Will Johnson, will be a better professional football player than Tyler Warren. I wouldn't push back with that. You can tell me right now that Will Johnson will make 4 or 5 Pro Bowls and be that player if he can stay healthy. He's a phenomenal corner prospect. But there's also a human element to this. And we don't know what Chris Ballard is thinking. We don't know how hot his seat is. We don't know how many decisions he's going to make this year based on if he doesn't perform in 2025, and if the Colts don't win 9 or 10 or 11 games, he's gone. So when you look at immediate impact and the way that Penn State used Tyler Warren last year, and when you factor that in with the combination that the Colts need a tight end really in the worst way, as Jelani Woods unfortunately hasn't worked out, for a combination of reasons Jelani hasn't worked out, Tyler Warren makes a lot of sense. And hopefully you can also attribute that Anthony Richardson has not been an accurate passer and basically say, Anthony, you are throwing to a guy to the size of a prime Rob Gronkowski. Well, not prime, but the size of a guy of Rob Gronkowski. And if you can't hit this player, we have a lot of problems. And that is, Tyler Warren would be the least of our concerns at that point, because then you'd have a quarterback confirmed draft bust. You'd be out of a job. You're basically throwing into a mattress here, Anthony. And if you can't hit this target, then we're all out of jobs we're all out of Indy if you can't hit this target. So Tyler Warren makes a lot of sense, and hopefully that Adonai Mitchell would progress a little better in year 2. Although I don't think Adonai was the main problem in his rookie season. I know the targets were pretty inaccurate at times. I know Adonai was, he definitely had his own faults for sure, but I think there's a lot of potential with Adonai Mitchell, and Michael Pittman should also return back to the player that he was in 23 next year. Tyler Warren would improve this team pretty significantly. Now with the Falcons on the clock, this is a player, this is a pick for me. It's a dream scenario. Will Johnson falls in your lap. I know the Falcons have a lot of needs, and I know you can definitely say, well, we need a pass rush in the worst way. We have not had a pass rush in nearly a decade. But the idea of having A.J. Terrell and Will Johnson as your corner duo, for me, is too good to pass up. I think a healthy Will Johnson is a top 5 to 7 player in this class, and the Falcons secondary outside, well, the corners rather, because not Jesse Bates, but the corners outside of A.J. Terrell to me are questionable. You are in a division where you have a quarterback that just threw 40 touchdowns in Baker Mayfield. Bryce Young looked better at the end of the year, and even when you get outside the division, you are in a conference that has receivers like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown. You get the point. You're going to have to defend good receivers at some point if you ever want to make it to the Super Bowl. And I think Will Johnson is a much better corner prospect than any other player at his position on the board that the Falcons would need. I really do like Malachi Starks, but I don't think the Falcons really need a safety right now, especially when Will Johnson is on the board. So, moving on to Arizona. The Cardinals are on the clock. And where I would like to go with the Cardinals is the trenches. And I think I didn't mean to click Kelvin Banks, although you can make a case for Kelvin Banks being a player to be taken here. But where I'm going to go here is Ole Miss defensive lineman Walter Nolen. Now, Walter Nolen to me is a player that has a pretty high floor. He looked really good at 21 years old. He was a top 5 prospect back in the 2022 ESPN 300, that recruiting cycle. And he's progressively gotten better over the past 3 years. And whenever you have a player like a Walter Nolen that was a top 5 recruit in their class, what can be concerning is if they never take a step at the collegiate level and they're kind of still riding off of that high school success. And I think this will definitely bring back some memories for Cardinals fans, but that was a kind of a big thing with their 2016 first round pick, Robert Nkemdiche, where he was also an Ole Miss prospect, where he didn't really improve all that much during his time at Ole Miss. But that's not the case with Walter Nolen. He will turn 22 in October, and I don't want this to be the central theme of today's mock draft, but when you look at the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this team has tried to build their way in a similar model to the way the Eagles have over the past couple of years. Whether it was Paris Johnson, whether it was, bringing in Trey Benson last year to have a running back duo of James Conner and Trey Benson, and then addressing the trenches with a guy like B.J. Ojulari and investing as much draft capital as they have in the trenches over the past couple of years. Even Darius Robbins, who unfortunately didn't work out in year one, although there was a lot within that pick. I'm not going to get into that right now, but Cardinals fans know there was a lot going on there. So Walter Nolen himself said that there was a comparison to Aaron Donald that he made himself. Basically, he wants to be Aaron Donald, and I like that type of confidence in a defensive line prospect. I want my defensive linemen and corners, and even offensive linemen, actually receivers too, I don't want them to have modest expectations. I don't want a guy to say, well, I'm Walter Nolan, and we're going up against, Creed Humphrey this week, or Mekhi Becton on the interior offensive line, and I don't think I'm going to be able to go up against those guys are going to bully me. No, I want them to be deliriously confident in their abilities, and for Walter Nolan to throw himself into the Aaron Donald, or to at least like have that lofty expectation there. I like that in a prospect. Now I'll go ahead and make a bold take. I don't think he's ever going to be that, but I like that type of confidence in a prospect. And I think that would be Jonathan Gannon's version of a Jalen Carter in his defense. That would be the impact that we're going for there. All right, now with the Bengals on the clock, this to me was a pick where you look at the board and it's pretty simple. You just pair a good pass rushing prospect to Micah Williams, look at the lack of production last year outside of Trey Hendrickson along the defensive line, and draft Micah Williams. The Bengals are going to have a lot of decisions to make coming up this offseason. Joe Burrow said at Super Bowl Media Week that he wants the future of the Cincinnati Bengals to have him, Jamar, T, and Trey Hendrickson, and he has every right to feel that way. And what would help Trey Hendrickson is to have a legit number 2 option at pass rush. And if they can bring in Micah Williams and be able to consistently get after the quarterback more than Sam Hubbard did in 2024 as that second option, that would be huge. Now, I would question the future of Myles Murphy at this point in his career with this selection, but keep swinging at the trenches, and hopefully you get a couple hits. I do like Micah Williams more than I liked Myles Murphy as a prospect, and that's a good pairing for Michael to be a good second option behind Trey Hendrickson. Now, with the Seattle Seahawks on the clock, this is, again, we are addressing the trenches here. I would like to address the interior offensive line. I would not mind Gray Zabel as a selection here. Would not mind it. I know there's going to be some people that question the North Dakota State part, but Gray Zabel had a great Senior Bowl against other major Division I prospects. I like Gray Zabel a lot, but where we are going to go here is defensive lineman from Texas A&M, Shamar Stewart. And like we discussed with Jonathan Gannon and building that defense, the way that, with big guys in the trenches, where our front 4 can get after the quarterback, I think Mike McDonald would have the same vision with the Seattle Seahawks. And if you can have a Shamar Stewart, and if you can have a Byron Murphy who showed flashes in year 1, and if you compare all of that with Boye Mafe, we're looking at a really good defensive line. And we're looking at something where Seahawks fans can legitimately get excited about and have a defensive line that can get after the quarterback on any down with just 4. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages in all of football is if you can have a defensive line with just 4, you don't have to send 5 or 6 or run different simulated pressures just to be able to get a single pressure in a game. If you can dominate with 4 up front, you have a really high floor as a team. And for me here with the Seahawks here, Shamar Stewart would elevate the floor of this team. And it's a player and pairing and team fit that I like a lot. Now, with the Bucs here, what I would like to discuss with this pick is I don't think there's a prospect where you look at with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here and basically say, you know what, we have to draft this guy, because if we don't, we are going to regret this for the next several years. I would like to point out that Emeka Egbuka makes a lot of sense for the Bucs if Chris Godwin leaves in free agency. So I do want to point that out for now. But where we're actually going to go here with this pick is we're going to trade. We're going to trade back a couple of spots. And I think a team that's actually really, that makes a lot of sense for them to trade up is the Los Angeles Chargers, because we have this 3-pick run right here. Actually, 4-pick run with the Packers, where this is what I would like to call a just order of just sitting ducks that can trade up at any, or that all need receivers that can trade up at any point. And I think if you are the Buccaneers, you are ideally trading with, I would say, the Chargers, because, and the reason that I would say the Chargers more so than the Broncos or Steelers is because you know they're going to go up to get a receiver or tight end, and the Steelers do not need another edge rusher the way the Bucs do. The Broncos don't need another edge rusher the way the Bucs do. So if you can kind of control the Chargers, in a sense, them going up and getting a receiver, I think that would mutually benefit both sides. So we are going to have a trade here. We're going to trade 19 and 20. We're going to trade 86 for the Chargers as well, and the Bucks are also going to give back 156. We're going to force this trade, and the Chargers rather, are going to draft Emeka Egbuka. And if you can have that duo of Egbuka and Ladd McConkey, you're doing a good job in terms of acquiring better talent for the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this next pick here for the Broncos, they unfortunately miss out on Emeka Egbuka, which is a pairing that I would like a lot. But we know how much Sean Payton loves tight ends. Tyler Warren, of course, went to Indy, but drafting Colston Loveland would be a good option for the Denver Broncos. And if you can have Colston Loveland and Bo Nix, I think that's a duo that would make a lot of sense for the future of the Denver Broncos. He's a good pass catcher. He is an upgrade at the position. We know Sean Payton loves his tight ends, and it would make a lot of sense for the Broncos at pick 20. Now, with the Steelers at pick 21, I'm going to be honest, I think they kind of are the last one standing in a game of musical chairs. And the Packers could also be in that situation at pick 23. And what I look at in a situation like this with the Steelers is, if the board plays out like this, it would remind me of the 2023 draft with the New York Giants, who were the last team standing. There was a run of receivers. It started with Jackson Smith-Njigba going to the Seahawks, and then it was Quentin Johnson to the Chargers, and then it was Zay Flowers to the Ravens, and Jordan Addison to the Vikings. The Giants needed a receiver. Unfortunately, they didn't get one. They drafted Deonte Banks, and it didn't exactly work out the way they intended. Now, I don't intentionally include that part to say that this pick is not going to work out, because I'll be honest, I love Jahdae Barron a lot. I think Jahdae Barron is a Pittsburgh Steeler in every sense. He's a versatile defensive back. He would remind me a lot of Mike Hilton when he played for the Steelers. Just a guy that you can plug and play. He is going to do his job at a high level. He is a floor raiser in the defensive back room. And if you can have DBs of Joey Porter Jr., of course Minkah, Jahdae Barron, and then have the pass rush of, we'll say, Cam Hayward for one more year, but then also to, have Keanu Benton behind him, and then of course Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt. That's a very good defense. Now, the quarterback situation would probably not be addressed in the draft. I don't think they would draft Jackson Dart in the first round, although I do like Jackson Dart. I just don't know how that would work out with the Steelers at pick 21. And I think there's also an option. I think there's a better route for the Steelers where they would go with a veteran quarterback, whether that's Sam Darnold or Aaron Rodgers. But for this mock specifically, I really do like the team pairing and fit of Jahdae Barron going to the Steelers. And I think Steelers fans would grow to love that pick. Now, with the Bucks up here at pick 22, this one's simple. You need pass rushing help. I think Jason Licht has done a tremendous job of building this team. I think he's one of the more underrated general managers in all of football, to be completely honest. But outside of Yaya Diaby, you need another edge rusher. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka did not work out the way they wanted. They have a good interior duo of course, Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey. And you can have I would really say there's 4 players to choose from here, and I think the 4 players would be Princely Umanmielen from Ole Miss, like his game a lot. Donovan Ezeraku, also really like his game. Jack Sawyer, and ultimately the player we're going to go with here, and that's Nick Scorton. Scorton had a bit of a down year in 2024 after transferring from Purdue in 2023, and I would say in July of last year, I thought Scorton would have been a top, probably 15 pick at the worst, but he had a bit of a down year this year. But I think Jason Licht will look at this selection and say that, we've seen what this player can do based on previous years, and I don't think in Scorton's case that it's a matter of him simply losing the ability to play that he did in 2023. And if you are a good NFL coaching staff, which I think the Bucks are a pretty good coaching staff all around, you can get Scorton back to the player that he was in 2023, and you can also back that up, or not back that up necessarily, but put him in a good situation with Yaya Diaby, with Vita Vea, with Kalijah Kancey, and have Scorton be your heavy-handed edge-setting pass rusher and get after the quarterback. Your what am I looking for here? Your edge setter in the run game, and then still be able to get after the quarterback. I like Scorton's game a lot. I think he makes a lot of sense for the Bucks at pick 22. Now, with the Packers up, I really never know what the Packers are going to do. They are a tricky team to figure out here. But I think we're going to go with Grey Zabel here along the interior offensive line. Grey Zabel is a really good prospect, like his game a lot, and that's where we're going to go at pick 23. To elaborate a little further on the Packers' selection of Grey Zabel at pick 23, it's a pretty simple combination of needing a player along the offensive line to help the way the Packers do, and I think Grey Zabel is pretty similar to Graham Barton, ironically a player the Packers passed over last year, who had a really good rookie season for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I would hope that they would not make that mistake twice. I also think Grey Zabel is a better offensive line prospect than I do Matthew Golden is as a receiving prospect at this point. Now, I don't think Golden is a bad football player. I simply prefer Grey Zabel along the offensive line for the Packers than I do forcing Matthew Golden and expecting him to be a wide receiver 1 in his rookie year and have those types of targets. And we know about the Packers' receiving struggles at times, but I would not necessarily like that pairing of Matthew Golden going there and having 120 plus targets in year 1 and being forced to kind of be that guy. There's a difference between being an actual wide receiver 1 and having the targets of a wide receiver 1. I don't think Matthew Golden in his rookie year would be a wide receiver 1. Now with the Vikings on the clock, to me this is a team that look at the picks here. They have 5 picks right now. Now it is worth noting compensatory picks have not been factored in yet, and they're going to receive a couple of compensatory picks, but they're a prime team to trade back. And when you look at the teams that are going to be selecting in this 25 through 31 range, look at the Texans here, center guard, or look at the needs rather. For the Texans, center guard. Needs for the Rams, tackle. Ravens, tackle because Ronnie Stanley's a free agent. Lions, center/guard, interior offensive line aging a little bit. Commanders, tackle. I think it makes too much sense. They're out of conference. They just got their rear ends absolutely kicked by the Philadelphia Eagles. To me, it makes too much sense for the Kansas City Chiefs not to trade up here. And they have an extra 3rd round pick from the L'Jarius Sneed trade. You give up 31, you give up 66. The Vikings, if you want to give up 161 as well to get another top 100 pick. So for any podcast listeners, the Football Analysis Podcast on Apple, Spotify, for anyone interested, it's the same YouTube audio, just without background music, and it is the same exact content. For now, we're gonna add in subscriber-based questions coming up in the draft process soon. But for any subscriber-based for any audio listeners only, the trade would be 24 and 161. The Vikings give up. The Chiefs would give up 31 and 66. And the Vikings also have pick 139. So we'll actually just give up 139 and get back 31 and 66 in return. And right now the Chiefs are going to trade up so they can draft Oregon offensive tackle Josh Conerly. I like Josh Conerly a lot. I know he... there was one rep in particular at the Senior Bowl where Mike Green absolutely destroyed him. But I still like Conerly as a prospect. I think he has a year of solid film, of solid work that we saw on tape all year. I know he didn't have a good game against Ohio State, but again, there was 600 snaps of him being a good football player. More importantly, he would be an upgrade for the Kansas City Chiefs right now. And they have that extra 3rd round pick. They're in a position where they can go up and make a trade like that. And it would also benefit the Vikings for obvious reasons. Now with the Texans here, for the Vikings, by the way, obvious reasons means they don't have a lot of capital because of previous trades. They get an extra pick, top 100 pick at that. Benefits both sides. Now with the Texans up here at pick 25, I think one player that I hope this happens. I don't know if he's going to fall this far, but Tyler Booker from Alabama is a prospect pairing team fit that is plug and play, and I think you have a solid starter for the next couple of years. CJ Stroud had a bit of a regression this past year, but it wasn't necessarily all on him. The offensive line was terrible. The receiving trio of Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs really didn't play all that much together. Nico missed some time in the middle of the year. Diggs tore his ACL pretty earlier in the year, and Tank Dell unfortunately suffered a major knee injury that we don't know how he's going to recover from. I also think Tyler Booker's a better offensive line prospect than I do necessarily think Matthew Golden is receiving prospect, at least at this potential pairing. I'm not saying Golden would be bad on the Texans because he would be fine. You know, if you have him as the wide receiver 2, behind Nico Collins, behind that true alpha receiver, that would be a really good fit for Matthew Golden specifically. But We saw the Chiefs last night get absolutely destroyed. We saw CJ Stroud get destroyed in 2024. Take the big boy and reap the benefits in 2025 and beyond. Now, with the Los Angeles Rams up, tight end would make a lot of sense here, but the value doesn't align. I'm a big Gunnar Helm fan. I'm just not a Gunnar Helm fan at pick 26, but Kelvin Banks does make a lot of sense for them. And why I like this team pairing, this prospect and team pairing, is we've seen the Rams dominate the trenches over the past couple of years, and I don't think it's a far-fetched take to say the Rams could have won their second Super Bowl in 4 years if they beat the Birds in the divisional round, and it was pretty close to happening. Well, not pretty close, but it was the closest game the Birds played all postseason for a reason. The Rams, to me, are a very underappreciated team of this era, and the job that Les Snead has done over the past couple of years to really retool that team kind of on the fly, with not having the draft capital they could have, because remember, they lost out on a top 7 pick because the Lions had the 6th overall pick in the 23 draft before trading back, and that was the Rams pick because they were injury plagued in 2022, and they finished the Super Bowl, or the defending Super Bowl year, they went 5-12. So in 2022 they went 5-12. They missed out on the top 6 pick. But for the Rams to address the trenches the way they have over the past few years, Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Kobe Turner, and Steve Avila, and everybody else that they've drafted, Kelvin Banks would add to that. And I like that pairing for them a tremendous amount. Now, with the Ravens on the clock, this is a tricky one here. There is, I mean, they drafted Nate Wiggins last year. Nate had a pretty solid rookie season. And I know some Ravens fans are probably not going to like this pick all that much. I think you can definitely make a case that they draft an offensive lineman, you could see how far the board goes down. I don't know if they'd want to go Ariante Erster. I know some Ravens fans are they have a little mixed feelings on Daniel Falele, but I think this would just be a classic Baltimore Ravens pick, and this is, of course, pending medicals. If the medicals clear, which every team is going to have access to, Benjamin Morrison's long gone, but for the sake of this mock, to be able to have Benjamin Morrison, Marlon Humphrey, Nate Wiggins for at least a year, hopefully 2 years, depending on how long Marlon Humphrey plays, because he will be 29 this year. It's a really, really good player on a really good team. And the Ravens, over the past several years, have and Eric DeCosta have done a similar style of building their football team the way Howie Roseman has the Eagles. Draft good football players and reap the benefits later. Now, with the Detroit Lions on the clock, their offense is phenomenal. It is just chef's kiss, just talent everywhere. The defense suffered so many injuries this year. And to go back to the motto, if you will, of today's video / pod, is you can never have enough trenches. You can never have enough pass rush. You can never have enough secondary. Jack Sawyer is the best player available on the board. And that's where we're going to go with this pick, is Jack Sawyer to the Lions. Having him be the second piece to Aiden Hutchinson's, or the Robin to Aiden Hutchinson's Batman, is pretty much by every definition of setting a young player up for success. And even in the Lions' case, to have a healthy Aleem McNeil get in there as well as a second option, and then a second pass rushing option, and then to be able to push the pocket, and then have Jack Sawyer be that second edge, third overall option as your pass rushing trio, if you will. It's good. It's just a good process. Now, we alluded to earlier about Matthew Golden. I wasn't a potential fan of him at 21 with the Steelers. I like him at pick 29 to the Commanders. And the Steelers situation would also be a little different because of the uncertainty around George Pickens and that entire situation with the Steelers. But I really like Matthew Golden going to the Commanders because he is going to be Terry McLaurin's, like we just said about Jack Sawyer to Aiden Hutchinson. He'll be Terry McLaurin's Robin. Matthew Golden's also a really solid receiving prospect. I think he is a really good route runner, similar to Terry McLaurin. And anytime you can have a good football player at a position of need, that is a winning move from the organization. You can certainly argue the Commanders need offensive line help, but Matthew Golden is the highest in terms of positional needs for the Commanders, he's the best prospect that also fits a position of need. I'm not a fan of drafting somebody like Cameron Williams at 29 over Matthew Golden, or even Ozzie Trapillo or Ariante Ursary when Matthew Golden's staring you in the face. Now with the Buffalo Bills, Kenneth Grant, he is, I love Kenneth Grant going to the Buffalo Bills. He's played in the cold at Michigan. He is a mountain of a man. Do not overthink the player Kenneth Grant is if he falls into your lap at pick 30 the way he did in this mock. Now, with the Vikings here, I think this is going to be predicated on what they do in free agency. I think they will address the offensive line in free agency and potentially go after a guy like Trey Smith. I think the motto of you can never have enough trench help certainly applies to the Minnesota Vikings for today's video, as their interior offensive line this year was led by a combination of Blake Brandel, Dalton Reisner, Garrett Bradbury, and Ed Ingram. And if they can bring in a guy like Trey Smith, it would help the team in a substantial way, or even maybe bring back Cam Robinson, kick him inside. But the value doesn't align, and there's also a chance they lose Cam Bynum in free agency. There's also the very real possibility of Harrison Smith either retiring or having 2025 be his final year. Malachi Starks, great prospect. I know there's going to be some Vikings fans that will probably have flashbacks with the Georgia safety and Lewis Cine, but Malachi Starks, good prospect. Don't overthink it. And I also think that Malachi Starks will fall a little bit because his 2024 season, and not due to his own fault, just because teams really didn't, they knew who he was. They didn't want to throw his way. So I think there's going to be a little bit of, not recency bias in the sense of going against him. There's definitely recency bias with prospects in terms of propping themselves up. But there's times where recency bias does not favor a player and they fall a little bit. And I think that would be in the case of Malachi Starks at pick 31. Omarion Hampton would also make a lot of sense for the Vikings in that scenario as well, depending how free agency plays out. Now with the Birds here, they just won the Super Bowl. Congrats to all Eagles fans for absolutely destroying the Chiefs the way they did. I know that was very vindicating based on Super Bowl 57's loss, and to come back and just throttle them. There's a lot of prospects here that make a lot of sense. You want to go with edge with Josh Sweat being a free agent. I love Donovan Ezeraku. Would be a good pairing. Would be a very Howie Roseman pick. Just good football player. Don't overthink it. Siobhan Ravel would also make a lot of sense. He's coming off of a torn ACL, and his draft stock obviously took a hit because of the torn ACL. I thought he would have been a top 20 pick prior to that. Definitely don't need a running back, so Omarion Hampton's not going to be the guy. But if you have any of Trey Amos, Siobhan Ravel, Donovan Ezeraku, I think the pick will be it'll be a defensive pick. So I'm fine with any of these three players. With the possibility of Josh Sweat leaving, I'm going to go with Donovan Ezeraku. And I wouldn't mind Ravel or Amos with Darius Slay being a double-digit year veteran at this point. But for the sake of today's mock, we are going to go with Donovan Ezeraku. So hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. We recently hit 180,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for the support, and as you can see on the YouTube screen right now, you can see every pick on the mock. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's pod as well. Please leave a 5-star rating if you did, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.